Hey everybody, it's John, and I'm here with Terry Johnson from Firearms Legal Protection, and we've had a little bit of discussion off camera, but I want to really talk about this one. We had a narrated video on the channel not long ago from Iron County, Utah, of an officer-involved shooting, and you make sure that you've gone and watched it. It's gotten a lot of views on the channel, of an officer who purposefully shot a suspect in the knee twice. And said he did so to not have to kill her. And different standards there. I asked Terry to watch it, and it kind of made his head explode. And these are the kind of things that we want to talk about. So from a legal perspective, let's talk about using this firearm as a non-deadly tool. Today's video is brought to us by the generosity of Firearms Legal Protection. Firearms Legal Protection is a legal defense program for lawful gun owners. You win the fight, and they will help you win the fight after the fight for the rest of your life. There's a link in the description for a coupon code for a discount for all active self-protection watchers. So Terry, just first of all, I want to say how much I appreciate you personally and Firearms Legal Protection as a whole for being willing to come and do this kind of education for us. So I know it's part of your guys' mission to educate.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate it, because these are the kind of things I think we look at and we go, wait a minute, how does this work? And if we don't have an expert to tell us, what are we going to do? We're just going to take our chances, right?
Right. And let me say this again, we're glad to be partnered with you guys, and we couldn't find a better organization other than Active Self-Protection to sit down and bring this to the people, because again, you put it out there for people to learn, to be educated about, and we appreciate you as well.
That's the whole goal, man. Thanks. Okay, so let's talk about this one. So Corporal Dunn comes up, and he's bought this thing in his mind, if you go watch the video, and he said, look, I knew I was going to have to shoot her. I knew she was an emotionally disturbed person. Couldn't get this guy to kind of get away from her. The taser didn't work. He tried it twice. You can hear it clicking and clacking. It's not connecting. And then just decides in the moment. You heard him say, do you want me to do like I did last time? And 2 out of 3 shots in the knee, it worked. Okay, fine. She drops a screwdriver. He gets her in custody. Thankfully, he had his tourniquet on him. Not the tourniquet I would suggest, but whatever. And she ends up not dying. Good. But what's your initial thoughts on when you saw this the first time?
It was like watching a horror movie, and you're looking at this and you're like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Please, what are you doing? Don't do that.
Right.
And he does it. And the problem that I have with this whole thing, more than anything else, is, excuse me, is the intent in his head. Because if you look at what it takes, first of all, there was, imminent fear of death, great bodily harm, and again, whatever else your state puts on. But my first question is, what was imminent there? Because if you look at this tape, there's a gentleman behind the young lady, and he's away. I think the police ordered him away.
She wouldn't let him away. She's like, no, I don't want him to go anywhere, but they're trying to separate him out. It's kind of chaotic.
It is, and he leaves. He finally moves away, and she's just there. Where's the imminent threat?
Well, and that's what the district attorney said, right? I don't see an imminent threat of death or grievous bodily harm here. She wasn't advancing. She was arguing. And so the DA said it was an unjustified use of force.
And I guess we can go on record to say I agree with the DA. I'm agreeing with the district attorney. But realistically, yes, I don't see how lethal force was used. Now, when you started out, you said the following: can you use a gun in a non-lethal manner? And I could say yes if you throw it at somebody. Okay.
So we could threaten with it, and that's a use of force.
It depends on where you are.
Yeah.
Okay, but again, if I'm threatening you with a gun, there's a crime to that. Okay? So whether it's assault with a dangerous weapon, whether it's felonious assault with a firearm, depending again where you are. But at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is, he probably could have used something else, because that's lethal force.
Sure. So I guess I'm saying if somebody threatens me with a knife and I draw my gun and point it at them, that's a use of force. It's not a deadly use of force yet until I press the trigger.
Correct. But think about this. What did you just say? If someone is threatening me with a knife.
Sure.
How far away was she from this from
Corporal Dunn.
Corporal, correct. She was a ways away. Could she do damage with that screwdriver as far away as she was? Probably not.
She'd have to close that distance for sure.
Right. There was no advancement on her part. So his use in this particular case, once he fired those rounds, that was a use of lethal force.
Yeah.
Now, fact of the matter is, and I just talked about this a few weeks ago with a few other attorneys, if you think about it, it's the use of lethal force. You don't get points for hitting somebody and say, okay, well, it wasn't lethal force because they didn't die.
Right. Just because it didn't work doesn't mean it
Exactly.
wasn't the use of lethal force.
And that's the part that people really forget about this. It's like, well, the person lived, so therefore it wasn't lethal force. Could she have died from this?
Easily.
So therefore, it's the use of lethal force.
So the interesting thing to me, though, Terry, is that so when the Officer Review Board looked at it, which the Officer Review Board in Iron County was the mayor and the chief of police, one other officer, a member of the community.
Okay.
And they all looked and said, okay, wait a minute, as they interviewed Corporal Dunn and looked all these things over, they determined that he operated, other than the fact that he had a gun and a taser in hand at the same time, that he operated inside of department policy, and so they retained him.
Well, the interesting thing about this, if you go back to the tape, and I believe you pointed this out, one, he knew the person was emotionally disturbed.
Yep.
I think he says 1096.
He did.
The other thing that's interesting is he's done this before.
This is the second time this has happened. He says, you want me to do like I did last time?
Yeah. And he had a stage of he was intending to do this once he got there. So when you put all those things together, you now have a major lawsuit potentially against this guy.
Yeah, so there's this idea of the criminal charges that the DA said, okay, I don't think this is a justified use of force,
Right.
but I'm not going to charge. Which, I mean, the district attorney has prosecutorial discretion.
Right. I disagree with that personally. I think what this corporal did was criminal. He used lethal force in a manner that's inconsistent with Utah state law.
Okay. So there you heard from the attorney. And listen, if he didn't get a lucky district attorney, he could very well have been facing charges.
Absolutely.
Whether or not he was facing charges, he could face civil action.
Correct.
And the standard of the civil action will be much lower than the standard of the criminal action. Because the DA said,
Yes.
I don't think I can get a conviction because you got to go beyond a reasonable doubt. But in civil court, it's a preponderance of the evidence.
51%.
Yeah. And so could still face significant liability. Now, of course, that's going to be on the people of Iron County, not on the officer, because
Right.
the Officer Review Board said he acted okay. From a legal perspective, somebody who, as a criminal defense attorney, you represent people in firearms uses regularly.
Yes.
This is your specialty.
Correct.
What would you say to somebody who sat in your office who did this?
If someone came to my office and did this, we have to go back to their mindset and say, what were you thinking at the time? This is someone that, unfortunately, you have to put on the stand, in my opinion, because there's no way to get out of other people what this person was thinking. So one, you put yourself on the stand, which you really don't want to do.
You're now open to cross-examination.
Exactly. The second thing you really have to look at, and I'd probably have to work something out with the prosecutor, I'd have to make an argument that it's non-lethal somehow because he didn't kill her. And while that's contrary to law, it's the only way I can see to really help this corporal out. You know, we'd have to find juries that are sympathetic to him as a police officer, and you'd almost have to sweep the law under the rug at this point, which
So-
you really can't do.
So it's going to be expensive, it's going to be time-consuming, and it's going to be a crapshoot.
It is.
And so do you recommend this use of deadly force to your clients?
Absolutely not. I'll tell you what, if he were a civilian, he would be prosecuted. I don't care how you cut it.
So you think this is a case where he got some professional courtesy?
Absolutely. And the reason I say that is, even if the prosecutor said the following, this was not justifiable in terms of the use of lethal force, what more do you need? If you've got a prosecutor saying that, but for the fact he's got a badge, what do you think he'd be at, you know?
Well, so these are one of those cases, and you guys all know, listen, I'm really pro law enforcement, and I love the fact that we have good people trying to do good work in that arena. This is one where I said at the end of the day, he had a very high level of skill. In his mind, he's trying to do something here to not have to kill this woman, and I can sympathize with that. But the more you talk to the legal folks, they say, man, I just don't think this was a good idea at all. And so my advice to people is don't do this. Don't try this. Number one, you probably aren't a good enough marksman to pull it off.
Agree.
Number two, I pulled it off on a square range under no stress with nobody trying to kill me.
Right.
Okay, fine. I've also had 600 hours or so of firearms instruction, which very few have.
Exactly.
Okay. But from a legal perspective, from a criminal perspective, you could very clearly face charges. And I think in a lot of places, depending on the jurisdiction, if this had been in Massachusetts or in Seattle, Washington, that officer probably would have been denied qualified immunity by the department.
Probably.
And would have been facing criminal charges on his own. So it's up to the locality you live in and the district attorney at the time, which, I mean, good luck, depending.
I agree.
And then you still have the whole civil liability as well. If she chooses to sue because of, I mean, not only maybe civil rights violations, but an unjustified use of force, and he injured me and now you're responsible for that, boy, that could be a huge problem, especially because he said, I injured her on purpose.
Yeah, and you know, the interesting thing, and this just kind of came to me, looking at this video, why now? I mean, was he just impatient? What if he had waited another 10 seconds? What if we could have brought someone else in to talk to her? I mean, what was the, no pun intended, the trigger that made him shoot at that moment? And without the imminency that we've talked about, that's why I can't justify the shooting.
So there it is, guys. I just want to reiterate to you, don't do this, okay? This was a bad idea. The officer, Corporal Dunn, I'm going to use this phrase with air quotes on it, got away with it, okay? It ended up being okay for him at the end of the day, but it was ill-advised. It's not how we recommend you use firearms, handguns at all, and it will lead to a host of trouble. I got to be honest with you, I think one of the biggest challenges that I see with it is the fact that it is out there in the world, so I felt like we had to talk about it, but it's going to lead to more people saying, aha, you should shoot him in the legs, when in reality, from a legal, a tactical, a marksmanship perspective, it's just a terrible idea.
Exactly.
And so just because it worked once does not mean y'all ought to do it. You've heard it from the attorney now. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. And stay away from this. Don't do it, period. End of subject. Have a fine day. Terry, thank you.
Thank you.